Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and welcome to our new lecture in prose course. Today we are going to continue discussing some topics about the plot structure and also to talk about conflict, to know what's the difference between plot and conflict, and also to talk about the theme of the story. And again, when I say a story, I don't mean exactly the short story, but the story that is found or that is in any literary work such as novel, novella, or the short story itself. But before going to the details, let's revise the main two types of characters in a story, which are the protagonist and the antagonist. The protagonist is usually the leading character of the story who fights for something or someone. By the way, it's not necessarily that the protagonist is a fighter. As we had taken in the last meeting or the last Zoom meeting, we discussed some other, let's say, types in which the plot could be a traveler. The protagonist could be a traveler. The protagonist could be a researcher in a request, let's say, requested plot. The protagonist could be like an ordinary people. So it's not necessary that in each plot or in each story the protagonist is a fighter. No. Again, he could be a traveler, a searcher, an ordinary, let's say, person, etc. We also call the main enemy of this character, which is the protagonist, whether it's another character or some natural or supernatural force. Again, not every antagonist is a person. Antagonist could be like nature, could be fire, could be some supernatural forces, etc. One, or we can say one who fights against something or someone. So this picture shows the structure of the plot. And the main components of the plot are exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and then finally the resolution. And if we have or if we want to compare between the rising action and the falling action, here we find that the longest is rising action. The longest is rising action. However, falling action has a short time in the story. Okay, so now let's talk in detail about each one. طبعا plot is the literally element that describes the structure of the story. Plot shows the causal arrangement of events and actions within a story, and this is what differentiates plot from story. Plot, there are causal arrangement, which means that this thing lead to that thing, and after, for example, X happened, this was the result. So there are usually causal arrangement of events and actions within the story. If we start by the exposition, or it could be named as the introduction of the story. It sets the scene, and the author introduces the setting and characters. We know a little bit about each one, to have a background about the characters, about the setting itself. So again, to provide description and background information. Now let's go to the rising action. Rising action. They are, if I say rising actions, they are a series of conflicts, and crises in the story that lead to the turning point, which is the climax. Now, what is the climax? Or it could be named as the turning point. The turning point. Event that the rising action and central conflict leads up to. So it's a result for what? It's a result for the rising action. A result for the rising action. بتضل تمشي لحديد ما تصل نقطة حاسمة. نقطة حاسمة between usually the protagonist and the antagonist. Place where plot turns or changes direction toward a resolution. Now let's talk about the following action. Events that happen as a result of the climax as the conflict grows closer to being resolved. وهنا بتبدأ الأمور تهدى بالستوري لأنه إحنا بالكلايمكس نقطة الصراع نقطة التحدي في قوة راح تغلب فممكن يكون الانتاجونست ممكن يكون البروتاجونست. طبعا هنا بكون أكثر نقطة فيها حماس وفيها يعني القارئ بيكون مشدود بعد في القصة بس بعديها بنعرف مين like who's the winner, who will die, who will survive, etc. So here like let's say the conflict grows closer to being resolved. Finally, the resolution, the end, the main conflict is solved or resolved. Okay, now this is regarding a plot. If I ask you, what's the difference between plot and conflict? What's the difference between a plot and conflict? Actually, they are different. Without conflict, there's no plot. So conflict is one of the main components of plot. It usually introduced during the rising action. In the rising action, there are some conflicts. Faced head-on during the climax and begins to work itself out during the falling action. Let's talk in more detail to know about the conflict. Actually, we have two kinds of conflict. They are internal بمعنى داخلي, external خارجي. Internal inside the character, him or herself. External between the character, the protagonist, and another like the protagonist, let's say. In internal conflict, the protagonist the character struggle take place in character's own mind, own heart. Usually something to do with choice or overcoming emotions or mixed feelings. So the internal conflict is in the mind or in the heart of the one character. So I'm not talking here about two characters, no. Here just I have one character with the internal conflict. For example, whether to go to fight or not, whether to, for example, to choose this girl to marry or not, whether to make a divorce decision or not. All these are internal conflicts. Whether, for example, to keep friendship with this person or to break the relationship. All these are internal. However, the external, which are between the protagonist and antagonist. And by the way, the antagonist again, It's not necessary to be a character. It can be nature, it can be society, etc. So it's like a group of characters fighting against society. Or character fights against social traditions or rules. Then we have other types of conflict like character versus supernatural, like God, ghosts, monsters, spirits, etc. Character versus fate, like fight for choice, fight against destiny. Character versus technology, like technology such as computers, machines, etc. I'm going to discuss with you Cinderella's story as an example of plot structure. So let's start with the exposition to introduce the characters, Cinderella, her stepmother, and stepsisters. It starts as once upon a time in a land far away there lived a girl named Cinderella. She lived with her evil stepmother and two evil stepsisters. Here also there is a drawing of the setting, time, and the place. So here in the rising action, which is a preparation for the plot, or sorry, for the climax, for the turning point. So here we talk about how the stepmother deals with Cinderella, how she makes her work all day long and into the night. So one day, here the introduction for the climax, it talks about the invitation to a ball that was sent to all the young maidens of the kingdom, but the evil stepmother would not follow Cinderella to go to the ball and locked her in her room. Cinderella thought all hope was lost until her fairy godmother appeared. Dressed in a beautiful gown and glass slippers, Cinderella rushed off to attend the ball. As the clock struck 12, Cinderella ran away as fast as she could, although Prince Charming looked for her. All she found was glass slippers. So we are coming closer to the climax, to the turning point. Here, the point of the highest emotion or tension, the point when you are the reader, you feel that you don't want to leave the story. You don't want to turn off the TV of the story as a film or story. You are focusing with all your emotions, with all your senses, and you are waiting for the result of this point, for this main turning point. So what's the turning point here? Cinderella held her breath as a Prince Charming gently slipped the glass slipper into her foot. It's when they found that Cinderella is the owner of the slip found on the stairs after she left the castle. So Prince Charming took Cinderella by the hand and made her his bride, the prince's bride. Now, what is the illusion of characters crisis? We know what was the main point. So here is the result, or what will happen after the main point. Cinderella went to live with Prince Charming in the beautiful castle on the hill. And the resolution, the last thing in the story, Cinderella and Prince Charming lived happily ever after. Now this is one of the assignment or the coming homework for you to choose a fairy tale you remember from your childhood days and diagram the elements of the plot using a diagram like the one in the presentation, be prepared to share with the class. If you want to make like a diagram, you can just like put the main components of plot structure and then to talk in detail about like each component. Now let's talk about other details regarding plot. There are other, let's say, criteria that may, let's say, shape the final, let's say, the final image of the plot. There are time and pacing. If you remember, when we talk about emplotment, we said that the writer or the author like can change a lot of things according to what he wants the reader to focus on. For example, we said that duration, when he wants the reader to focus on, let's say, like a very simple scene but which takes maybe, let's say, 10 pages. However, he can skip 50 years of one character in one just simple paragraph. So all these like go back to what the author wants the reader to focus on according to their importance and according to their relationship with the main climax, with the main events in the story. So the plot of a story is framed by a time span that suits the writer's purpose. So all these things are according to the writer's purpose. Most stories are told in chronological order, the order in which events unfold in real time. Start from event 1, event 2, event 3, event 4 till the end. But is it the same for all stories? Do all stories like follow the chronological order? Actually, the answer is no. Sometimes writers might manipulate time to control our emotions. They might, for example, slow down time to emphasize a moment of danger, or speed up time to skip over events that do not have like or move the story along. And this is the answer for my question. Do all stories follow chronological order when they tell the stories? The answer is no. And here is the explanation. Actually, we have something called flashback. Back بمعنى نرجع لورا. We start from the present moment and we go back to the past. And this is why it's called back. Flashback, back من ورا يعني. A scene that interrupts the present action of the plot to flash back and tell what happened at an earlier time. Flashbacks can provide background information or strengthen our understanding of a character. For example, there may be some events between, let's say, two characters in the, like at the beginning or at the exposition, rising action of the story. But there are some things that we do not understand. We want to understand like deeply. The characters may chat together with themselves, talking about past experiences. So when they talk about their memories, when they talk about their past experiences, we can understand, let's say, like understand more. We can find answers for some questions we had in our mind. We can have some interpretations for things that we, let's say, don't understand from the beginning of the story. Now, what's the opposite of flashback? It's a flash forward. Flash forward, a scene that interrupts the present fiction of the plot to shift into the future. Flash forwards can create a dramatic irony. The readers know what will happen in the future, but the characters don't. And also we have foreshadowing. If you remember, when I talk about the roots, how to know the meaning of the root. For بمعنى let's say before. على سبيل المثال في عنا head، كلمة head رأس. forehead اللي هي الجبهة، مقدمة. for بمعنى أمام أو مقدمة. foreshadowing what does foreshadowing mean؟ for لحالها for مع shadowing. Foreshadowing is the use of clues to hint at events that will occur later in the plot. And this is like could be used to make suspense for the reader, so he can analyze these hints, for example, to decide who's the killer, for example. Foreshadowing can make a story more exciting by increasing suspense, as I have just said. The last thing that will be discussed in this presentation is the theme. What do you think the best definition for the word theme? And when I ask you, give me the theme of, for example, this story. Do you think the theme is one word? Is it a phrase? Is it a sentence? Or a paragraph? What do you think? When I tell you, for example, we are dealing with Frankenstein novel, and at the end of, for example, at the end of the novel, I ask you to provide me with the themes. Are you supposed to tell me like just separated words? For example, love, hate, science, or it's a full complete sentences? Okay, now let's talk about theme in detail. The theme is the universal message about truth or life that is communicated by a literary work. Could be life lesson, meaning, moral, message about life or human nature. Theme is not just one word like love or happiness, no. Theme is expressed in at least one sentence. For example, money can't buy happiness. It's better to die free than live under tyranny. Okay, now the question, how do you find the theme? Actually, you can explicitly sometimes figure it directly. But most often in fiction, the theme is implicit, hinted, or suggested. Themes, okay, so how can we infer the theme? We can infer the theme from the metaphors used by the authors, the similes, personification, imagery, tone of voice, symbols. From, let's say, we can say from like the dialogues themselves in the novel. Now this is like tips for you to identify the theme. So when I ask you, please provide me with the theme of the novel. So be careful. Look closely at the title for clues. And sometimes you do not have just titles, you have subtitles as a Frankenstein story. If you remember, I discussed with you the title and the subtitle. And the subtitle like could give us a lot of hints about what could be happening in the story. It could help us even to know the theme of the story. If we like read about the story of the god in the subtitle, we could make like foreshadowing about what will happen in the coming events. The second tip is to look for ideas that are repeated more than once. Also to look for lessons that the characters learn. Think about what happens in the story and how it can apply to real life. This is the end of our presentation. See you in other videos.